freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner, cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The waiting is over. The memo is out. Will there be hell to pay for the FBI and Justice Department? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, and we'll break down and analyze the memo released by Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee with LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor and constitutional lawyer Scott Cosenza. Meanwhile, as the president tries to push through the four-prong immigration plan he outlined in Tuesday's State of the Union address, it seems that few, if any, are asking the question that must be answered if the immigration issue can ever be settled. We'll tell you what that question is and why Trump's proposal answers it. White House reporter for the Washington Examiner, Sarah Westwood, will join us to analyze whether any of those big plans unveiled by Trump in his State of the Union can actually become reality. Plus, Jeff Charles of LibertyNation.com jumps on board to discuss Christians and politics. We start by welcoming in LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza to analyze the memo. The memo reminds me of the plane on the old show Fantasy Island, Scott. So
yes, boss.
Good comeback. Start with an overview for us of the memo itself and how it either met your expectations or was different than what you might have expected in the run-up to it.
Well, Tim, I don't know that I necessarily had really any expectations. Let's recall this is a memorandum provided by or produced by a member of the Congress and his staff to other congresspersons. So this is not, for instance, many times in the memo it discusses the application for the warrant for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. But we don't actually have that application here. So these are the words of an elected representative and his staff. So with that in mind, a memorandum could be almost anything, right? So before it was released, I really didn't have much in the way of expectations. And given the politician's history of overselling and underdelivering, I was concerned that it would be about a ingrown toenail of a of an infraction. That's what I kind of was thinking ahead of time. But that's not what we have here, I think, Tim. There are some important and troubling facts revealed in the memo, and some other things that kind of need really more investigation and analysis. So
what are the things that should be the headlines from this memo?
Well, so two things I think are abundantly clear from the memorandum. Basically, the only reason why the warrant was sought. Okay, this is the October 21, 2016 FISA order authorizing electronic surveillance on Carter Page, who was a high-level volunteer or whatever you want to call him for the Trump administration.
There's some argument as to just how high level he was.
Yeah, but he wasn't stuffing envelopes in.
No, but he was not setting not setting the president's national security policy.
Yeah, sure. I wasn't suggesting that. I just mean he wasn't a paid employee, and he is a U.S. citizen. The U.S. citizen part is important.
And important
for
that
how
you
the
say
court,
too. He's not a paid employee, but a volunteer.
Right.
Yes.
And so if you want to eavesdrop on a U.S. citizen under the FISA laws, what you have to do is apply to the court for a warrant to listen to them, and then every 90 days after that, if you still want to listen, you have to go back to the court for sort of a renewal application. Mm-hmm. All right, that application has to be certified by the deputy director of the FBI, and then an attorney general or deputy attorney general or assistant attorney general that has been Senate confirmed. So there's two. There you have the agent who wants to get the permission to listen. He's got to get permission from the FISA court to do that, and that has to be signed off on by two different people, the head of the FBI, okay, or one of these high-level attorney general positions. So because there was the application itself, and then there were 3 renewals. And so that was 4 total applications before the court, 8 total sign-offs. Now, the people who signed off on that, and we know the names, some of these names do sort of ring out with the investigation. Comey signed the 3 applications on behalf of the FBI. McCabe signed 1. Sally Yates signed one of the
former deputy attorney
disgraced
general,
disgraced former attorney
general under Obama, and for a couple of weeks under Trump, where she made her mark.
Yes, this is the person who basically got herself fired in order to become like a hero to the Twitter left,
a martyr for the left.
Yeah.
Yes,
and then a man called Dana Boent, who was then acting Deputy Attorney General, and then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Those are the ones who signed these applications. Now, the applications, we know, according to Deputy Director McCabe's testimony before the committee in December of last year, 2017, that no surveillance warrant would have been sought without the Steele dossier information. So they wouldn't even have gone to court to ask for. That's how important and central to the application that the Steele dossier was. Now, they did not disclose in their FISA application that Steele was or that Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson were paid by Perkins Coie, who was the DNC Hillary law firm, even though they knew it at the time.
So these were various cutouts that were used as indirect ways of getting the Steele dossier by the campaign.
Well, basically what we have
Clinton.
is the campaign pays for the dossier, and then Steele and either sells it to the FBI or perhaps, and we don't know this is not discussed in the memo, in collusion with some members of the FBI, perhaps Mr. Stroke or Lisa, whatever her name is,
Lisa Page.
But we don't. So, but let's just stick. I think there's a lot here on the table with what we have with the memo. So if we stick to that, one of the things, Tim, and this is what I think bears further analysis, and I certainly would like to see that application itself. It says the initial FISA application basically doesn't note those things. So what we don't know is, did any of the subsequent renewal applications inform the court about that particular point with respect to Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson paid by Perkins Coie? I know it's a lot sort of to keep straight for me too. The ORs, okay, let's talk about the ORs for a second if we might. OHR. Bruce Orr was Deputy Attorney General, senior DOJ official who worked closely with Yates and then Rosenstein. Now, we don't know from the memo if they worked closely with those people on these matters. It's sort of intimated by this memo, by the Nunez memo, that they did work closely on it with these matters, but that's not stated explicitly. So I would like to see some clarification from Nunez or the committee on that. But what we do know is that Orr's wife's employment was never disclosed to the court. Now, during the same period, Orr's wife was employed by Fusion GPS in the cultivation of the opposition research on Trump. So we have a senior member of the DOJ who may have worked closely with the people who are actually signing off on these applications, providing the information or ginning the information up in order to supplement this application paid for, Tim, by essentially Hillary Clinton. And
it's not disclosed. I mean, the key is that it's not disclosed to the court, to the FISA court, that a partisan political operation had dug this up as opposition research on Donald Trump.
We have an adversarial system of justice in our country, and one party will go in and another party will go in and they'll argue a case, and then the judge can look at the evidence and say, okay, I agree with X, Y, or Z on this sort of with this tension of arguments. When we have an ex parte proceeding or a proceeding without an opposing side, okay, Mr. Trump's or Mr. Page, they didn't have attorneys in the FISA court arguing against the warrant issuance, right? So there was nothing like that. So the duty then becomes upon the attorneys who present this information in court. They have a professional and legal duty to the court. I mean, when we take the bar exam, if we become licensed to practice law, we swear an oath, and part of that oath includes a duty of full disclosure to a court. And if we know that there is a principal fact that a court would want to hear that we have possession of, especially in a case where there's no opposing counsel, it's our duty to disclose that to the court. Some lawyers think that it's our duty to disclose it even if there is an opposing counsel. In other words, I was taught that if you really want to write a great memorandum of law, you would say, well, Your Honor, there is a case sort of on point on this that goes the other way, but that's not really a great case, and here's why. You don't straw man or leave out that argument. And so it's very important, I think, in this case that they didn't disclose that to the court. And it might mean that the court would not have issued those warrants to begin with. I think that if I were a judge sitting in that court and I found out that most of this information, all the key information for this warrant application, came from essentially paid opposition research.
That's a vital fact to know. So let me close with this question. Have the Republicans, with this memo released by the House Intelligence Committee, succeeded in creating sufficient questions about the integrity of the investigation against Donald Trump going all the way back to the beginning?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break and then come back with politics from an entirely different angle. Christians and politics, as we're joined by Jeff Charles of LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
What we have heard here today has been a political spectacle.
We elect these guys to run the country. They're just not doing their job.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, it's an issue that started to take hold in 1980 and has continued in the 4 decades since. Christians and politics. Ever since Christian conservatives in general, and the moral majority in particular, became activists in Ronald Reagan's quest for the presidency, the question has been, how involved should Christians be in politics? And even more so, how much should they base their support on faith-based versus worldly factors? The issue arose like never before when a huge majority of self-described conservative Christians voted for Donald Trump, he of 3 wives, alleged sexual scandals, blunt language, and all the rest. Jeff Charles of LibertyNation.com, who has the audacity to be both a black conservative and outgoing Christian, has launched a multi-part series about this on LibertyNation.com entitled Political Discourse for Christians. And Jeff joins us now. So, Jeff, explain to me how Christians could be so supportive of a candidate, Donald Trump, who they were told had serious morality issues.
Yeah, great question. I think at this point, people are more concerned with policy, that the type of policy that the president would implement, than they are with character. They can look beyond flaws if they know that the president is going to enact policies that line up with their values. On top of that, a lot of people forget who he was running against. Hillary Clinton had serious character flaws as well. So when it comes to character, there wasn't much of a choice there. So really you had to look at the policy that they were going to enact. And I think this didn't even start with Trump. This started with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton wasn't the first president to have serious character flaws, but his were the first that were really publicized. So since then, people kind of understand that our politicians aren't angels. We would like them to be, but they're not. So when there's a candidate in front, or when there's 2 candidates in front of you, you end up having to go with the one that's more likely to enact the policies that you want to see. And I think that's where a lot of Christians are going.
Yes, as James Madison famously wrote in Federalist Paper number 51, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But we need no further proof that men are not angels. We're in a toxic political environment like none any of us have seen in our lifetimes. And in your piece, you write that political discourse has ended friendships, driven wedges between family members, and even broken up marriages. Yes, we see much of the vitriol coming from the left since they control most of the major media outlets. But let's not kid ourselves. Conservatives are engaging in this behavior, too. Expand on that, if you would.
Yeah, sure. And I'll even start by saying that it's really sad that political differences are ending friendships and driving wedges between people. There's no reason why it should do that, but that is the world that we live in today, unfortunately. I would say that, yes, a lot of it we are hearing from the left because they own all the major media outlets. They're in charge of our educational institutions and our entertainment industry. But conservatives, there are some that are engaging in this behavior. All you have to do is to go on to any conservative blog, look at the comments, and you'll see lots of people on the right engaging in the same type of behavior. But there are some prominent conservative figures who are doing the same. For instance, Tommy Loren recently, when Joe Kennedy the third gave his rebuttal to the president's State of the Union address, Tommy Loren went on her Instagram and posted 2 videos that insulted him. So on one, she called him a nasty little ginger. On the other, I can't say what she said because it's not appropriate for your show. But the point is that she made no intelligent argument. There was no rebuttal to his rebuttal. It was just senseless name calling. And it was pretty disappointing to see.
Our guest is Jeff Charles of LibertyNation.com, discussing his multi-part series, Political Discourse for Christians. So here's a simple question, Jeff, with likely a complex answer, a question you ask yourself in your piece on LibertyNation.com. How do Christians discuss politics with others without it turning into a fight?
Yes, that is a complex answer. I think Christians should participate in the political conversation, even when they get heated. Jesus himself was actually pretty confrontational at times, especially with the religious leadership at his time. But I think that Christians need to keep things as civil as possible and to focus on not attacking people, but you can be aggressive in attacking bad arguments. And it actually reminds me of a musician named Daryl Davis. He is a black musician, and he has befriended members of the Ku Klux Klan, people that hate him. And by doing this, he was able to convert a large number of them and get them to leave the Klan. So in my opinion, if he can do it with people that hate him because of his skin color, we have no excuse, because people on the right and the left, most don't actually hate each other. And Davis was successful not by calling them racist and not by calling them names. He did it by attacking their arguments and befriending them. In his documentary that came out, I think, in 2016, there's one scene where Daryl says of the Klan guy next to him, he says, "I consider him to be a really good friend of mine." And the person in the Klan said the same about Davis, which blew my mind. So if he can bridge the divide in that way by sitting down and having dialogue, it shouldn't even be difficult for Christians or people who are non-Christians to bridge the divide between their political ideologies.
Jeff, how would you say, how distinct would you say Christian conservatives are politically from conservatives in general?
Politically, from what I've seen, I think there are more similarities than differences, but I'd say the main differences have to do with social issues, such as gay marriage or abortion, things like that.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. That
is Jeff Charles. Check out his series, whether you're Christian or not, about Christians and politics, up now on LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back with Say What, featuring the question nobody seems to be asking about the president's immigration plan.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner. This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
Say What, the portion of Liberty Nation where we unveil some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. And as expected, the Memo has hit Washington like a ton of bricks, bringing into question the very legitimacy of the multiple investigations into Russian interference in the 2016 election, and certainly about collusion between Russia and Trump. We see the clear evidence, according to Republicans, who one would presume would not put out evidence that could be refuted in the memo, that FISA warrants were granted for surveillance on Trump campaign operative Carter Page on the basis of opposition research by the Clinton campaign, the famous or infamous Trump dossier. And the research included salacious, unverified accusations about Trump, most famously the golden shower he supposedly unleashed at a hotel in Russia, and many other fantastic revelations. Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch, who's filed countless Freedom of Information Act requests, is someone who's followed this as closely as anyone, and he says this could be the end of the probe by special counsel Robert Mueller.
It'd be difficult to overstate the importance of the revelations in this memo, not only in terms of the corruption during the Obama administration, but the really devastating blow it strikes at the Mueller investigation. Look, when you have the Obama Justice Department take their best shot with a FISA court, and their best shot is a Clinton campaign document to run the narrative that there was Russia collusion requiring surveillance of a Trump campaign official or volunteer, and it turns out there was really nothing else there but for that dossier paid for by Clinton and DNC funds, then that means there's no Mueller investigation without the dossier paid for by Clinton and DNC funds. So the whole thing is subject to really, I think, being called off now by the Justice Department if they're brave enough.
We will now wait and see if the alternative memo put out by the lead Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, will also be released. Meanwhile, we know that the left is dead set, at least for now, on opposing the president's immigration plan. No surprise, even though his plan provides a DACA fix that would legalize twice as many of the so-called dreamers as the Democrats even demanded. But equally unsurprising is opposition from conservatives who want no amnesty in any form for any illegal immigrants. So, I have a question for those who say no DACA deal under any circumstances. Here's the question. What exactly would you do with the hundreds of thousands of DACA beneficiaries living and working in this country if DACA expires and they become illegal again? What do? Come to their doors, cuff them, drag them away, and deport them? Enter the workplace and remove those dreamers, arrest them, deport them? Really? Because that's what you'd have to do if you were enforcing the law as Trump has promised to do and has been doing already. Like it or not, these are people who came here well before they reached the age of reason under the auspices of adults who entered the country illegally. You can't deport these people to their native country, so to speak, because they effectively have no native country. They're effectively American because they've known nothing else. So go ahead and blame Trump for proposing to give these people legal status and a path to citizenship over 10 to 12 years. But it's not his fault that these people are here. He wasn't president when all these illegals flooded the country. Trump inherited this mess, and he's not going to fix it by trying to pretend it can just be reversed with a stroke of a pen. See, Donald Trump is a problem solver. He was dealt a 7-high hand, the worst possible hand, and he can't change what he inherited. And he can't rip the country apart by deporting the people most all Americans believe are here by no choice of their own and should have the chance to come out of the shadows and join the system. Instead, this president proposes a realistic solution for what amounts to about 15% of the illegal immigrants in the country. This is 15% of the illegals we're talking about. The rest of them will be subject to deportation. Millions of them. What Trump can do and proposes to do in this immigration plan is to control what he can control from this time forward by tightening chain migration, terminating the diversity visa lottery, and yes, building the big, beautiful wall, plus other border security measures. Of course, none of Trump's plan is acceptable to Democrats, tripping all over each other to respond to Trump's State of the Union, led by who else? The stumbling, bumbling Nancy Pelosi.
He stooped to a new low in terms of how he dealt with issues. The president presents himself as generous toward dreamers, but he is holding them hostage to the most extreme anti-immigrant agenda in generations. We heard more insulting words of ignorance and prejudice toward patriotic immigrant families. Instead of a hand of friendship, as some have said, he presented a clenched fist.
Spit it out, Nancy. Spit it out. That was at a press briefing, but there were 4 or 5 more formal responses to Trump's State of the Union from the left. Joe Kennedy IV inexplicably spoke in front of some kind of broken-down car, his mouth glistening from what looked like drool but turned out to be too much chapstick, apparently. And then, of course, there was Auntie Maxine.
One speech cannot and does not make Donald Trump presidential. He's not presidential, and he never will be presidential. He claims that he's bringing people together, but make no mistake, he is a dangerous, unprincipled, divisive, and shameful racist.
Now, you might say, why even bother to play that? Maxine Waters is just a far-left extremist who doesn't really speak for the Democrat Party. But incredibly, she's become a heroine on the left. She goes on MSNBC all the time with questioners who actually take her seriously. But wait, that's not all. There was yet another formal response to Trump's State of the Union from Bernie playing the class warfare card.
During the campaign, Donald Trump told us, quote, "The rich will not be gaining at all," end of quote, under his tax reform plan. Well, that was quite a whopper. As president, the tax reform legislation Trump signed into law a few weeks ago provides 83% of the benefits to the top 1%, drives up the deficit by $1.7 trillion, and raises taxes on 92 million middle-class families by the end of the decade.
Proving again that you can find some kind of statistic to back up whatever you're saying. But the left's contempt for Trump was evident throughout the State of the Union, such as when Democrats universally failed to stand for the parents of 2 black victims of MS-13 illegal immigrant gangs. One of those parents said he was not pleased.
I felt it was very disrespectful. For the simple fact, the Democrats who was there who did not stand up, they were African Americans. So that hurts me a lot, to show that they did not have the respect or to honor what just happened to our lives and to America's lives. And it's not right. You know, regardless of how they feel about the president, they should show the respect, because I would show them the respect if that was their loved one.
But to compound the situation, Joy Reid of MSNBC said, "It's only right-wingers who care about MS-13 illegal immigrant gang violence."
He gives a speech tonight in which he makes it sound like the biggest issue in the United States, the biggest threat is MS-13, a gang nobody that doesn't watch Fox News has ever heard of. So he makes it sound like they're the biggest threat.
So let's briefly discuss what kind of threat MS-13 really is. It was started by Central American immigrants with the slogan Mata, Viola, Controla, which means kill, rape, control. The Justice Department says they seek to live up to this motto through truly shocking acts of violence designed to instill fear, vicious machete attacks, execution-style gunshots, gang rape, and human trafficking. MS-13 gang members commit murder and rape and home invasions and kidnapping and carjacking and robberies, largely against other gangs, but with major collateral damage to victims like the ones whose parents were recognized by Trump at the State of the Union. And they're believed to be behind 25 killings on Long Island alone in the past 2 years. So there you go. More hard reality the left refuses to acknowledge in their quest for open borders and unlimited immigration.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, many are the plans in a man's heart, so says the Bible. But can any of the plans unveiled or reiterated by President Trump in Tuesday's State of the Union address actually become reality in the angry, bitter, balkanized environment which has come to define the politics of today? The four-pronged immigration plan, the $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan, substantial reductions in the cost of prescription drugs. Joining us to help answer whether these things are realistic or not is Sarah Westwood, White House reporter for the Washington Examiner. Sarah, welcome to Liberty Nation.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. So the Democrats sat sour-faced for the duration of the State of the Union, and it certainly didn't seem like a good look to react stone-faced to, for example, the lowest black unemployment rate ever recorded, or the heartbreaking story of that North Korean defector who was mercilessly tortured by the totalitarian regime in Pyongyang. Now, though they're still leading in those generic polls, but not by nearly as much as a month ago. Their poll numbers are slipping, and Trump's speech went down well with the public. Is it really, do you think, in the best interests of the Democrats at this point to base their entire strategy for winning control of Congress on simply opposing, resisting everything Trump does and says?
Well, that's the fear the Democrats have had for a while now, is that if they can't agree on a unifying message, I mean, a message that unifies their caucus, then they'll be stuck in the same trap that held them back in 2016, which is that their campaigns were based entirely on opposition to Trump, and that just wasn't enough to win. Now, that could have been driven by a fact that a lot of people in 2016 didn't think President Trump would win, and now they know he already has in 2018, so that strategy could be more effective. But the State of the Union and these debates about immigration and tax reform that we've been having over the past few months have sort of exposed the lack of consensus within the Democratic Party about what they stand for.
Well, I mean, it does seem that they're doubling down on a spectacularly failed strategy from 2016, but apparently they believe that the environment is different enough now that they can do the same thing and win this time. But let's talk immigration here. It seems like the president has boxed the Democrats into a corner, offering more than they actually demanded on DACA, daring them to turn down the deal that would give Trump and the GOP what they want on the wall and the border, on chain migration and the visa lottery. Is this something Democrats will compromise on, or do they think it best that they reject any immigration deal proposed by Trump?
Well, at this point, it looks like there's not much room to negotiate on the Democrat side, because the progressive wing of the party is still upset with Senate Democrats for what they perceive to be a surrender in the face of the government shutdown. They wanted congressional leadership to fight Republicans on protections for Dreamers, and that didn't happen. Senate leadership sort of acceded to Republican demands. That was a spectacular failure on the part of the Democrats, and now they're in a tough position because even though the White House and Republicans are offering them more or less everything they've ever asked for, they're under the gun from their own constituents to resist the White House because they've already been perceived to have given in to Republican demands on opening the government back up.
Well, I wrote a piece on LibertyNation.com just a few days ago about how Chuck Schumer is between a rock, the Trump and Republicans, and a hard place, which is his own base, and he can't seem to win for losing. But let's move on to talk about something else that the president is expected talked about, an issue that should be about as bipartisan as it gets these days, infrastructure. But what he proposed was big, really big on the price tag, $1.5 trillion, but small, very small in terms of details. There was vague talk of involvement and investment of a large portion of that $1.5 trillion by the private sector. What is it that the president wants to see happen to fix our roads and bridges and airports?
Well, the White House has in the past floated a proposal that would involve a public-private partnership. So the taxpayers would put up part of the capital, and then private companies would make investments that would fill in the rest of that price tag that the White House listed. Back when the infrastructure ask was a $1 trillion package, the White House's framework involved a $200 billion funding stimulus from the government, and the other $800 billion would presumably come from private companies. Now that it's $1.5 trillion, we don't know what the breakdown is between what the government will put up and what private companies will put up, but it's not entirely clear that everyone is on board with this program, including conservatives who are wary of spending that much money when there's no guarantee that private companies will come to the rescue and fill in the rest of the blanks, and then the government will be on the hook for funding a lot more of these projects.
We're with Sarah Westwood, White House reporter for the Washington Examiner. Now, the president promised during the State of the Union, Sarah, as he did during his presidential campaign, to lower the spiraling costs of prescription drugs. Now, the Mayo Clinic reports that 70% of the American people use at least one prescription drug, and more than half use more than one drug. So this is a popular issue. How exactly might Trump be planning to affect such a drop in prescription prices beyond, say, publicly shaming drug manufacturers?
Well, one way that the Trump administration has tried to get a handle on this problem is to try to encourage the production of generic drugs and make it easier for companies to produce generic drugs so that one company can't corner the marketplace on a certain drug and then jack up the prices as much as they want because they have a monopoly. Generic drugs help solve that problem. And so you always have to strike a balance between making it profitable enough for pharmaceutical companies to invest in developing these new drugs because they can charge a little bit more for them, and making it affordable for consumers. So the Trump administration has sort of been trying to find that balance.
Okay, last question. By your measure, has the tax reform bill made a big, medium, or small difference in how the public views Trump and the GOP? And not just in terms of a stronger economy or more jobs or more money in people's pockets, but also just the sense that Republicans can actually govern instead of simply talk.
I think it's a big impact, and we're only just now starting to see it. I mean, it's just this month, February, when people are going to start seeing more money in the paychecks they take home every week. That's really when you're going to start to see a lot of goodwill build around the passage of this tax bill. But certainly it's boosted the GOP's credibility because what they said would happen is happening. What Democrats said would happen is not happening. So maybe people are going to put a little more trust in Republicans moving forward. And you're absolutely right that it sort of eviscerated this argument that Trump and Republicans can't govern because they did pass a historically significant piece of tax legislation. And public opinion polling shows that people have a much more favorable view of the tax plan now that it's going into effect, and they're not just seeing it through the lens of what Democrats and the media are saying about it.
Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. I really enjoy reading your stuff in the Examiner.
Thanks for having me.
That is Sarah Westwood, White House reporter for the Washington Examiner. So that is it for our show this week. The program Liberty Nation Radio plus LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, are available to you at LibertyNation.com on demand, as well as from fine podcast providers everywhere. This is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation.